Hi everyone, it's Emmy Neal, your teen librarian at the Lake Forest Library. I'm coming to you today. We're going to talk about how a book gets published because there's been a lot of conversation on the internet and I get the impression that you guys don't entirely understand the long and involved process behind how some of your favorite books end up on the shelves. So, hi guys, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to go right ahead and get started. So, the first thing you guys should, I guess, know is how long are books typically. And I don't mean necessarily in pages, because publishers can do a lot of things to manipulate the size of a book. What I'm talking about is, in general, for their category, how long are books? So chapter books, which are pre-middle grade books, think of them as right after easy readers, but right before something like Percy Jackson. Chapter books for elementary schoolers usually range between 5,000 and 20,000 words. That's the range that they're looking for. And they can make those books as short as 180 pages and as long as 300 pages. It just depends on the style and the font and if they include illustrations. Middle grade books, which is the category right above chapter books, middle grade books come in between 20,000 words, so they're right at the top of chapter books, to 60,000 words, which is about 17,000 words shorter than Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That's the general middle grade category. These are obviously super flexible. These are just the basic rules for when you're writing a book, what are you aiming towards? Young adult comes in right with middle grade. They're 50,000 words, so just below what a middle grade fantasy would come out as. 50,000 words up to 100,000 words. And again, a lot of YA books can be bricks. A lot of them can come out longer, but for a debut, for a first book, that's the typical age range. Age range? That's the typical word count. The age range for YA is typically geared towards 7th grade to 12th grade. But again, things like The Hunger Games are sold as YA books, and then instead they get dropped down into the middle grade sphere because they realize that 5th graders and 10-year-olds are devouring The Hunger Games, and that's where they can make the most money. So in the end, publishing books, as with many things in the world, comes down to money. But adult books overlap with young adult books because the assumption is that adults have pretty much the same attention span as their kids. So adult books typically come out around 60,000 words all the way up to 120,000 words. And these, again, are entirely flexible standards. So Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, I mentioned that earlier, so I'll just throw out the number. It comes in at, I'm pretty sure, 76,900 words. So that is a book that comes out looking like this, right? Which is pretty thin for something that has that many words in it. On the other hand, Game of Thrones, which is an adult fantasy book, which means it should come in at the top of the word count at 120,000. That's what the publishers tell you they're looking for. Game of Thrones is 298,000 words. So it is a long, long book. And there are books that are longer. Obviously, Game of Thrones, actually, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm pretty sure Game of Thrones is the shortest of all of the Song of Ice and Fire books. So when publishers are looking for a book that they want to add to their catalog, they're looking for something that is spectacular. They're looking for something that is exactly to their taste. And how do they go about finding those things? Well, first off, if you've written the next Game of Thrones or the next Harry Potter, you don't send the book to an editor. The first thing you do with your beautiful 70,000 word book is send it to critique partners. You can find them online. You can find professional services if you want to pay money. I wouldn't recommend paying money. There's a lot of people out there who are willing to read your book if you exchange your book with theirs and give their book a chance. They will go through a long editing process, right? You guys go back and forth about what things you liked and what things you didn't like and checking spelling and all of that stuff. And then once you have finally buckled down, right, what you think the best book this could possibly be is, you are going to send it to an agent. And an agent is the one who is going to send that book out to editors and publishing houses. So how do you get an agent? Well, first you take your beautiful book and you attempt to condense it into a 250 word summary that you send in an email that's like gonna hook their attention so that they'll send you an email that says, I would really like to read this book. This book sounds really interesting. And that is a huge skill. There are a ton of people online who specialize in writing query letters, who are willing to help you write query letters. There are a lot of articles and blog posts to help you write your own query letter. But editors at publishing houses, there are 5 major publishing houses in America, and then there are dozens of smaller publishing houses. Almost none of them are going to accept books from unagented writers. That's just the way it goes. So let's just say you send your query, the agent loves it, they read your book, they love it, and you guys sign on. What does that mean? You have basically asked the agent to represent you and your interests, and the way they make them their interests, the way you can ensure that your agent is going to get you the best possible deal they possibly can on your book is they work off of a commission. So when you sign up with a literary agent, typically it's a 15% commission. That is the industry standard, and that is pretty much all you're going to pay them. You don't pay them anything else until they sell your book. And then what does that process look like? There's a lot of stages to this when it comes to actually selling a book. So your agent, hypothetically, in an ideal world, has relationships with editors at major publishing houses and knows what they're looking for. So when they sign on your book, they think editors X, Y, and Z are going to love this book. They'll send the book off to the editors will read it, and if they like it, they come back with an offer. Now the waiting can take months. Pretty much everything about this can take months. You are waiting for editors to read it. Editors most often will then inform your agent, yes, they are interested, or no, they are not. Sometimes your agent doesn't get to hear anything at all, but your agent works through a list. They've sent it out to a bunch of people all at once, and maybe, if you're lucky, an editor comes back with an offer. And an offer typically means that the editor then took your book to acquisitions. Acquisitions either read it or read a summary of it, and they attempted to figure out how much money could your book make them. And when they determine whether or not your book will make them money, they then determine how much of that money is worth paying you. So for the sake of simplicity, let's just say that they love your book, you get an offer, and it's $45,000. They offer you $45,000 for your book as an advance against royalties. Now remember, your agent takes 15% of that, all right? And you don't just get a check for $45,000, because if you got a check for $45,000, odds are a lot of people would just run away, and the publishing house would never, ever actually see that book. So instead, they divide it into thirds. So you would then get $15,000 minus your agent's commission when you sign a contract with your publishing house. You would get the next $15,000 when you turn in the final edits for your book, because even though you have spent all of this time with your critique partners, with your agent, polishing this book to be the best it possibly can be, you've sold this book to an editor, you now get to do it all over again. So once that process is done, you get your next $15,000, and you get the last $15,000 when your book hits the shelf. But there's a lot that happens in between that time. Particularly, right, 3 months before your book comes out, you finally get to see your marketing plan. And your marketing plan pretty much determines how much money on top of the money they paid you, your publisher is going to invest in making sure your book makes money. And one of the major ways they do that is through advanced reader copies. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of advanced reader copies, but those are editions of your book that are printed in like a flimsy paperback. Here we go. They look like these, actually, and sometimes, this is A Song of Wraith and Ruin. It came out on Tuesday. It's a phenomenal YA fantasy book. Was definitely more than 100,000 words, but we're not judging. And on the back, it has what their marketing plan is. So you can sort of use that to scope whether or not your publisher wanted the book to make the New York Times best-selling list. For those of you who don't know, we can talk about this later if you have any interest in it. The New York Times bestsellers list is not determined based on the number of copies of a book that's sold. The New York Times bestseller list is made up pretty much entirely. The number of copies does play a role, but that's not how you end up on the list. So advanced reader copies can also look like this. Now, This is a book that I believe, I should have checked the back before I came here. Yeah, it's going to come out in November. And they didn't have a cover yet, but they wanted to get this book in the hands of people as quickly as possible. It's called Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellafleur. It's an adult romance, so romance is going to fall typically between 60 and 90,000 words, depending on how prolific the author is. So doesn't have a cover on it, but still free book. So we picked it up when I was at my last librarian conference. It was really good. You get your arcs. Hopefully those arcs go to people who write reviews, and those reviews create buzz, and then eventually, typically, right, on your release date, your book comes out. And ideally, right, in a perfect world, you would hit one of the lists. So there's the USA Today list, which is determined based on the number of copies, and it's pretty much the only place you can see John Grisham get kicked off the list by a very hungry caterpillar. The USA Today list does not determine its numbers based on what genre they do, what genre the book falls under, though they leave that to you. If you wanted to look only at mysteries or only at adult or only at children's board books, they have ways for you to filter that online. But in their print version, it's everyone for themselves, based entirely on the number of copies that book has sold at retailers across the country. Then the New York Times bestseller list is, of course, the biggest one. So when they take sales numbers into account, your best chance at hitting a bestseller list, and therefore, hopefully making enough money to make enough money, is determined based on the number of pre-orders. So pre-orders are the books that were sold and paid for prior to the Tuesday that your book came out. So how many books can you sell in 1 week? Not as many as you may have sold the 3 months before your release when you started what's called a pre-order campaign. So you may have noticed, particularly in the young adult sphere, the New York Times bestseller list doesn't change very often. In the YA sphere, particularly, we have had the exact same list for the last 4 weeks. We're hoping, because of everything that's been going on in the world and some of the phenomenal books that dropped last week, the list will have a huge change up today. It hasn't come out yet. It's probably actually came out at 2 o'clock when I started this video, so I'm excited to see what's on it. But the New York Times bestseller list is curated. The algorithm is considered proprietary, so they have never shared what goes into it. But what we can gather from the way books are put on there is that it determined by the number of copies that are sold combined with the amount of money the publisher has put into their marketing plan and the amount of money that the publisher paid you, the author, as an advance. Now, your advance is that $45,000 we were talking about earlier. That's all the money you are going to get until your book earns out. Now, what does earns out mean? For every copy of a book sold, you earn royalties. So this is a paperback. Paperback royalties are typically slightly lower than hardcover royalties, but this is a large paperback. It comes in at $17 in America. So let's say you make 20% of $17. Now, if you got a $45,000 advance, you need to sell quite a lot of copies before, right, that 17 times 2 is... Okay, so it would be $3.40. You earn $3.40 when I buy this book. In order to make $45,000, you then have to sell a lot of books. There are a number of authors who have never earned out their advance. They still manage to sell books, but they haven't earned out an advance yet. And then there are some authors who sell their book and manage to earn out their advance in the first week, right? Those are the ones that publishers have put a lot of marketing money behind. And that's pretty much the mystery behind publishing. That's the whole spiel about how books are made. If you guys don't have any questions about that, then I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go. This was a pretty quick video by our standards, but then again, we are talking about books, which is one of my all-time favorite things. I could go on about them forever. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm going to take a quick look and see if there were any questions. No, just a lot of you. Okay, guys, thank you so, so much. I hope this sheds some light in how books get published and how your favorites have made it onto the shelf. If you have any questions, by all means, email me at teen@lakeforestlibrary.org. I would be happy to answer them. Bye, guys. Have a great day.